Okay, right.
Okay, over to you.
Okay, brilliant. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good morning, afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. This is one of the sort of the real benefits of online discussions, that you can sort of literally talk to anyone in the world at any time. Certainly when I was growing up, it was only the sort of the province of sort of sci-fi films of the future. But as we've just been having a quick, well, Jack and myself have just been having a quick discussion about time. Time moves on relentlessly, so it can either be can't be stretched, although it sometimes feels like that. And of course, one of the things that you're all involved in, and of course the reason that you are here, is that I would imagine everyone is involved in doctoral research, or indeed maybe research of which is postdoctoral. So I wouldn't rule that out. It's how to, of course, have enough time to sort of do the research, which of course is most important to certainly get the doctorate. But of course, what comes out of research is the sort of the product, the contribution to knowledge. But of course, as we should all realize, and part of the sort of the fundamental part of the process of research is knowing what already exists, which again may seem very obvious, but of course it didn't get there by accident. And what I'm going to talk to you in the next 45 to 50 minutes or so is what this research, or what your research should lead to, which is publication. Because of course it's the sort of the thing that is normally a starting point for any research, what exists in terms of extant knowledge in normally, of course, the sort of journals and books and the like. But of course, as we know, the social media world is full of lots of other sort of sources of information, all of which are sort of valuable in their own way, although there is a hierarchy of research. And of course, those that are involved in active research will realize, of course, that sort of the best research is that which, of course, is published in sort of the highest ranked journals. And there's a whole argument about what ranking is about, but I'm not going to go into that, because it varies depending upon the sort of the discipline, and of course there are various metrics used to that. Okay, the most important thing is that you don't get published by accident, which is a point I've already made. It takes a very deliberate intention on your part to sort of take some aspect of your research, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail during the presentation, to write it up in such a way as it ends up in sort of the whichever medium that you decide is most appropriate to get the message across. And of course, the point is that lest I need to emphasize this, is that if your research is important, you do want it to get to as wide an audience as possible, although that there are various questions to sort of what that may be, but you choose your medium carefully, and you want it disseminated, because of course that's how we get to know things. And dare I say it, that's how the sort of and I'm using this word in the sort of inverted commas, the scientific community, because of course that's often what research is seen to be. But I do appreciate, and I'm a case in point, that a lot of my research is not necessarily about science. Quite the contrary, it's about sort of the world of management and social organizations and other sort of aspects. And I won't belabor this point, that I'm a great believer that the notion that you can treat human beings as scientific objects is somewhat fallacious. But hey, that's an argument for a different day and a different presentation. Okay, without further ado, what are we doing? Okay, you may have heard this expression, and it's an old one, but it's the idea that, well, it is publish or perish. And those of you that are actively involved in research and talking to academics will know that in the world of academia, a measure of your capability and indeed your relevance is the sort of the amount that you publish. Some people are sort of, I'm always amazed at sort of the phenomenal amount that they're able to sort of get out. Although, of course, quite a lot of that, as you may notice, I was actually, incidentally, I published a book, published a couple of books this year, which, and books, just to sort of to add, that they're a very valuable part of it. But of course, their relevance, it does depend upon the sort of the amount of original contribution. But the point I'd like to sort of come back to that if I may, but one of the references, and it was absolutely horrendous because of course that I wanted to sort of do it in what's known as the Harvard Convention, which of course all of you will be aware of, I hope, which of course is to sort of do everything in sort of alphabetical order. And I had to sort of to go to this one particular article, which was actually to do with global warming, but it was from the Lancet, which is a medical journal. And the way that they had presented the references, it was in I think a different order. Well, see, it wasn't. Don't think about it. It was in a different order, and it presumably in terms of seniority or something like that. I couldn't quite work it out. But anyway, I had to then go back and sort of reorder it into sort of everybody being alphabetically sort of shown, which is the convention I was using. So it was consistent. And I think in this particular article, I would easily say that there must have been over 30 sort of references, that's quite unusual because, and indeed, you get a lot of work which is collaborative. And that's a really brilliant way to sort of to publish. And of course, if you can collaborate, your work, it takes the sort of load, and that's a good way to sort of to get known by people who are sort of experienced as well. Anyway, we'll come back to that. But okay. I'll read this out because, of course, it is obvious. Contribution to the corpus of knowledge, and if you don't contribute, then nobody knows about your work, And okay, for many of you, I would guess the sort of the main game in town, as it were, is to get through your thesis and to pass that and to achieve the sort of the doctorate, and that's absolutely fine. But if the work that you've done is as valuable as it should be, and indeed the whole point about getting the doctorate is that it should be a contribution to knowledge, then you should really sort of want to sort of the world to know, or as many of the world to know as possible, how important it is. And, we see this all the time in terms of news headlines, a new drug developed for, okay, the big one in recent times has been for coronavirus, but medical researchers are sort of constantly looking for sort of the cure to all sorts of things. And that's how we sort of know about these things. We know that if we have a headache, we take paracetamol because it was developed for particular purposes. And and again, it works very well, and in terms of the sort of the dissemination and our understanding of the sort of the world in which we live in. So of course, what I've also said there, and I've given you sort of an indication of the sort of the hierarchy of contributions. And I've deliberately sort of started with conference contributions, which are a really great way to sort of to get your, I used the expression later on, dipping your toe in the water, seeing what it's like before you sort of throw your whole body into this thing, books, book chapters. But of course, I don't sort of rule out, as I sort of do later, using sort of blogs and the like, which are also sort of a good way, if you like, to sort of to publicize what you're up to. Okay, so what we're going to do, and that's without further ado, is to sort of think about sort of publishing, because publishing is a very vital part of what academics do, and researchers like yourselves equally so. So what we're going to do is to understand that, what I would hope, of course, is that sort of you go away from this and you think more carefully about sort of what is that you need to do in terms of developing your writing skills. But yeah, everything is about sort of practice. You won't probably get it right first time. Very few do, and anybody who's ever been through the peer review process will tell you it can be somewhat traumatic, and it may take a number of attempts before you get it right. So practice does indeed make, if not perfect, it certainly makes you better. The hierarchy of publications, which I've alluded to already, which we'll come back to, the fundamentals of structuring academic writing. There is a sort of a particular way of doing that, which you probably all should be aware of, because it's what you'll expect to see, or what your examiners will expect to see in your own thesis when that's published, or it's only submitted rather. I put this in because, of course, it's a learning process. The more you do it, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more you do. It's cyclical, and we become better by sort of knowing where we make mistakes and where our strengths are, and obviously sort of using our strengths as much as we can, and working on sort of the areas that are not quite so good. The most important thing, I came across this many years ago. Good writing, no matter where you read it, should be something which is easy to sort of to understand and consume. And one of my great difficulties, I have to say, is that even as an academic, I read papers which are sort of sometimes impenetrable. They're written in such a language as to sort of to exclude, and there's probably a very deliberate purpose in this, but I think that if your intention is to genuinely inform as many people as possible, then for sure, if it's only going to be read by other academics who know the language, well, that's one thing. But if you want it to be understood by a wider audience, then recognize that sort of not all people talk in the same way as academics who are sort of steeped in sort of, what may be seen as somewhat arcane language. And the other thing, of course, is that, so this comes back to, this is something I always encourage any student I've been involved with to do, which is to sort of to have confidence in challenging existing theory, because existing theory is whatever it may be at a particular time. We sort of talk about the sort of the accepted wisdom, as it were, the established thinking. The idea of a paradigm, but paradigm shifts occur. Thomas Kuhn wrote about this many years ago, many decades ago. And established knowledge gets chipped away, and all of a sudden there's a big shift. The chances of sort of any PhD student ever doing that is probably fairly remote, but nonetheless, part of what we're engaged in is shifting sort of the terrain in minor ways, but of course it's advancing our sort of sum of knowledge. Anyway, all of that will be why should you publish? Well, of course, that I think is probably fair, because I to our understanding of the sort of the can better understand, or collectively that's how societies develop. Indeed, just very quickly going back to sort of what I was writing about fairly recently in sort of the book which was published last week, which was about green manufacturing. Again, my role what green UK is this weekend from tomorrow, holding the COP conference to do with climate change. What we've had over the last 200 odd years since the Industrial Revolution is the buildup of emissions, and of course, as we know, those emissions come from sort of the burning of fuel, which of course helps to sort of to produce the sort of the industrialized societies, which of course we all, well, the large proportion of this planet benefit from, but of course they do have certain downsides. So of course, and the fact, as I sort of said at the outset, that I'm able to talk to a number of people in disparate parts of the world, in different time zones, instantaneously, is it's a testament to sort of our understanding of how the sort of the world works. In such a way as to sort of allow internet technology and all the rest of it. It certainly didn't exist in my childhood. And what's interesting, what will the world look like in another, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and indeed, if you want to be really adventurous, another century. But of course, the things that sort of will become everyday items that we can't live without, are probably not yet been invented, but people will look back on this time and they'll probably think that we were kind of rudimentary. That's assuming, of course, the world has not been consumed by emissions and sort of climate change and whatever, which of course is what COP26 is all about. Anyway, so what we're trying to do as researchers is to sort of to ensure that new knowledge is disseminated in the appropriate media. And of course, I put this quite deliberately, because what universities are very good at, I mean, obviously the main thing is to sort of they emphasize the importance of journals, but of course they often have press offices and publicity departments whose very job, of course, is to sort of to draw attention to the work being carried out, because of course it's a very valuable contribution to wider society. And quite clearly, certainly in the UK, the vast majority of the universities are publicly funded, so of course it's a kind of duty, as it were, to sort of to make people aware of the sort of the knowledge that we have. And indeed, one of the really great things that I've sort of seen in recent years is a shift from sort of journals being sort of closed, where of course you have to pay your subscriptions, which can be fairly hefty for many institutions, and of course that can make them very exclusive, to being open access. So it's not perfect by any means, but of course the more that we can make knowledge open to sort of the wider world, the better. Okay, bullet point number 3, ideas generate new thinking and it becomes self-sustaining. And what I'm saying there, which lest it sort of be obvious, is that sort of the more we can drop new ideas or our thinking it kind of that might be a sort of seed that sort of plants a sort of an idea in someone else's mind. And of course, that's how we sort of we develop as societies, by that collective wisdom, as it were, that collective endeavor to make the world a better place. And again, coming back to COP26, and I have no particular involvement in it apart from sort of hoping that it goes well. That by bringing the world's great thinkers, of course, as we know, there's many hundreds of scientists involved in sort of the production of the documents. It is entirely a collective endeavor on behalf of the sort of the world's population, which that really is how the sort of the world should operate. Importantly from you as an individual, though, coming right back down to sort of where you're at, what you're trying to do is to develop your reputation, and the more that you can do this through research, the better. Research is obviously a good thing, but you want as many people to know about what you've done as possible. And indeed, in the last bullet point there, what I've stressed to you is that if you can publish, and indeed you can, and there is no rule as far as I'm aware, certainly every doctoral work I've ever been involved in, every institution, referencing your own work. Indeed, quite the opposite, that it's highly encouraged. If you can show that your work has already been published in some way, particularly in a referee journal, that makes it sort of all the more persuasive. It's a really good way of saying to your exam as well, other people have reviewed what I've done, or parts of it, because obviously you won't be normally have published the whole of the theses, but it does then allow the sort of the examiners to sort of say, well, it provides a sort of a method by which it's very hard for them to say, oh, we can't pass this because it's not worthy, if others have found it to be so. But again, there are no guarantees in that, but I think it would certainly, any student I've come across that's published, it's all the more, as I say, persuasive as a result of that, and very convincing. Okay, so where to publish? Right, okay. Any publication is evidence of contribution. So as I sort of said earlier on, you can start at the sort of I don't wish to be dismissive, but quite clearly writing something for a newspaper, a magazine, or a blog, and I've done all of these. Obviously the sort of the level of intellectual endeavor that goes into that is a lot less than will be for sort of writing a sort of a journal article, for instance, or an article for a referee journal. Normally, of course, there may be a review process of sorts in terms of sort of the editor taking a decision on sort of whether to publish or not, but nonetheless, it's the bar is somewhat sort of less high, if I may sort of say. And of course, what that does do, it provides a sort of you with an ability to do something which is easy to sort of to gain some access and some practice, and it's a good thing. And of course, what I also think is it's about confidence building. If you do something and it's successful, it gives you the confidence to try something different. And of course, it's always about sort of ramping up. And of course, in the next bullet point, what I'm saying there is don't be over ambitious. Commence at a level that allows you to have a go, dip your toe in the water, to experience the joys of exposure. And indeed, I would, as anybody who has not done so, there is a sort of a certain amount of satisfaction, well, incredible satisfaction that comes from sort of seeing your name on a sort of publication of whatever it might be, whether it's a sort of in the sort of the journalistic endeavor, or a conference proceeding, or sort of a book chapter, indeed may even be a book, and then of course the sort of journal article. And as I said here, third bullet point, start with internal conferences, because of course they're safe spaces. It allows you to sort of present ideas, to sort of be critiqued in a constructive way. And indeed, I at Doctoratehub, if I could get the word out, we're developing, I can't remember, whether it's a symposium or a colloquium or a conference of sort, but we're developing something which will allow people to come together to do quite precisely this next year. So Jack will talk about that perhaps at the end very briefly, to give you some indication of sort of the dates on that. Whoops, there's a sort of a rogue S slipped in there. Should have made sure that was got rid of. But think about a chapter in the book if possible. So, and what I've said there, that quite often edited books, of which I've done a number, are a really good way of bringing people together. And of course, the thing that, how do people sort of know that you exist? Well, of course, if you've been to conferences and you've publicized your work, they know you're available, or they know that you're working in that space. And that's often sort of the way that sort of invitations to sort of contribute to anything comes about, by being part of the sort of the collective, if not body, but the collective grouping in that particular sort of discipline, or that part of it. And at the end, articles and journals, they are sort of seen as the sort of key objective for sort of any active researcher. It's the sort of the way that you live or die, and academic reputations are made on the basis of them. Okay, so I'm going to run through some sort of tips, because of course I think that these, ultimately, there's no simple way to sort of to publish. It is what it is. It's about sort of doing the things which I've already talked about, looking at sort of what's available and how you think you can contribute. But of course, the thing about writing, indeed, for any sort of forum and in any method, and publication, it comes down to sort of the simple principles. Your research topic should be unique, because of course, although don't get too carried away by that, it may be sort of research which has been carried out before, but what you're doing is looking at it in a different way, which allows you to sort of to give a different perspective, and that's where the contribution comes. So that's the most important thing. You're contributing to knowledge in a way which has not been done before, and new perspectives or new ways of thinking are often what that is about. Provide some sort of logical reasons why you believe it's important and relevant. It should be persuasive from that sort of point of view, because nobody wants to read things that they think they've read before. So again, what you're doing should have some sort of novelty. And of course, that the more novel, and we see this all the time, this is how researchers, they can often develop their reputation very quickly by doing something which appears to be pretty radical, and that's perfectly fine, because of course that gets people's name into the the public sort of discourse, as it were. Don't rush, and there is a difficulty. I mean, and I appreciate that if somebody had started a doctoral or their doctoral journey, that they would not be expected to sort of publish within, and I'm not going to sort of to give you a sort of a fixed amount of time, but you're not going to be sort of publishing on day one. Quite clearly, you've got to have something to contribute. So, and it really depends upon what you think it is that you're saying that's relevant and is going to happen to, as I keep sort of emphasizing, contribute to the sort of the body of knowledge. But the sooner you can do it, the better. And again, to give you a case in point, I did some things certainly early on in my PhD, or certainly in a couple of years in. I did it part-time, I should stress, which was thinking about the sort of the research process, because and I contributed to a special journal of research methods, which was very valuable, because it helped me to sort of work out a lot of sort of my particular thinking. And it helped to sort of my understanding of the sort of the process that I'd undergone, I thought was useful, and being able to then articulate it was also very helpful. And what it did do, just to sort of to really stress, was it was helpful, because of course it helped, it required me to sort of to be really sort of careful and clear about what it is I was saying. And I think my sort of methodology chapter was a sort of a lot better as a result. And of course, needless to say, I then referred to sort of to this particular sort of journal paper in my sort of methodology. Sorry, in the well, obviously in the methodology chapter, but in the sort of the PhD when it was eventually completed, because of course it was a sort of a contribution to knowledge. So it worked on all fronts. So of course, but what I would also say is that you don't feel the need to rush into publication. It should be something which is seen as a sort of a very positive sort of process. It's contribution to your armory, as it were, or your repertoire. But the one thing I do appreciate, of course, it takes time, and in the sense that sort of as I sort of said, it helped me, and although it could seem as a distraction, but it shouldn't do. It should be a valuable part of your development as a sort of a competent and confident active researcher in terms of engaged in doctoral work. As I would always appreciate, writing is a skill that sort of comes very sort of easy to some people, remarkably easy. And that those people I sort of feel I have so much admiration for. and I'm sort of I covet what they've got. I'm jealous in the sort of the best possible way. I wish I could sort of write in the way that some people are able to sort of to do it in a sort of they can write in a sort of free-flowing way. It's a skill, like everything, and of course some people sort of it takes a long time. Some people never feel that they write well. Indeed, if you talk to some great authors, that's what they say, that it doesn't always flow in that sort of way. It takes time and effort. So of course the other thing is that as many of you will be involved in sort of doctoral research, there are sort of people in your institutions who will sort of provide help with this. But also the other thing is, as I indicated a while ago, collaborate, because of course if you can sort of learn from others, and that's one of the other very valuable things I sort of found. I worked with sort of another PhD researcher who was a really great writer, and I learned a lot from him about the sort of the way in which writing is done, or writing is a process that is undergone by the individual, and the sort of the things that you do to sort of to increase your sort of your skill and confidence. And again, I keep emphasizing this. Conference is a great way of getting to know new people, to learn what's there, to learn the sort of the existing knowledge. And as I say, if you can sort of publish a paper, it provides a sort of a starting point, a sort of a marker. I'm involved in this, and you can come and talk to me normally afterwards. And of course, as I say, that can be a really valuable way of helping you to develop your network for research purposes. And indeed, it can be a sort of a way that you identify people who might be sort of capable or appropriate to examine your sort of thesis when that time comes. Okay, but of course, as I've said there, you may not get it right first time, but hey, that's the sort of the nature of this particular process. Secondly, keep in mind where you want to sort of to publish. Again, I feel like I might be over-egging this, but no sort of PhD student or no doctoral student in the first couple of years is probably going to go into a journal, but it's not impossible. And it depends upon where you're at, who you're working with, and quite clearly, if you can, and certainly this is how it worked for me, and it was very, very helpful. If your supervisor is interested in collaborating. And indeed will draw you in. That can be a really valuable way of getting that experience. So again, it depends on whether you're sort of working collaboratively, or you're working individually. And so obviously you've got to sort of be aware of the sort of the hierarchy, and working to sort of the skill set that you've got the sort of the best capability of providing sort of work that will indeed get published, because it can be a process fraught with difficulties, particularly if you sort of submit to sort of journals and you're rejected, which that happens, because of course not everything that you submit will get published. That is a sort of the way of the that particular sort of process operating. Okay, write so your work is meaningful and important. And of course, the important thing is, if people don't believe what you're saying, then it's not important. But oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. So you be convinced about what you're doing, but of course, be important that also be aware that you need to sort of write in such a way, of course, as it has authority. And we're going to come back to that in a couple of moments. Of course, the other thing about reviewing, which of course is that this is, if you've not come across it, peer review is the sort of the method by which you submit a sort of piece of work for a journal or a conference, and it goes through a sort of, again, to use that word, a process whereby a number of people look at it. They're normally sort of the experts in the area, and they give a critique of whether they believe it should be indeed contained within the published proceedings of a conference, or text if that's the way it operates, or perhaps also sort of a referee journal. And of course, the benchmark is often a lot higher as a result. But of course, what's important about doing this is this review gives you sort of feedback. And I've said it should be seen as entirely constructive, but of course, those people who've been through this and been rejected may not sort of agree with that entirely. But the point being that when you are published in a refereed publication, then of course you can sort of say it's been through that process. And of course, do remember that the doctoral work is indeed it's peer reviewed. It's you have normally sort of an internal and an external examiner. Sometimes that there may be more than 2 people, but at minimum there's usually 2. And if those 2 people believe that your work is worthy of being regarded as a sort of as contribution to knowledge, that's how you get the sort of the doctorate. So again, think about sort of this as a sort of a way, if you like, of testing your ideas and getting it right before you sort of get to sort of the Viva. The third of this particular sort of section, quite clear that this is one of the jobs of your supervisor, quite obviously, that they should be constantly reviewing your work, because that's what they're there for. But also, of course, all the great things about being in a university department is to sort of work with others who are sort of part of the sort of the community, and you can get them to sort of to look at your work, and that you'll do the same for them. It becomes a sort of, if you like, a collaborative network where you bounce ideas off one another. And again, critiquing your own work is important. And of course, the sort of I have to sort of, I find the sort of the whole thing about writing is to get a sort of a version down pretty fast, then to start editing it. And of course, that's where the sort of the real skill is, to sort of to be really critical. And what you've always got to try and do is to sort of think about it and see it in the sort of the way that others will see your work, insofar as that what you want to do is to sort of be able to sort of write in a way that you think that, I guess this will persuade others, and this is being at it, or you've achieved a level that, as I say, others would expect to see, that's consistent with the sort of the standards of that particular publication, journal, book, whatever it might be. And again, but you can only know this by sort of working in the sort of the territory and being sort of acquainted with what already exists. Certainly in terms of journal, but of course in conference proceedings, this may also be the sort of case. You may be asked to resubmit. And again, what I always think, perhaps when you get to your Viva proper, you may be asked to sort of resubmit with either minor or major amendments. It's a positive process, and what the sort of the review process is essentially saying, this publication could be better. We believe that it should contain whatever they believe that you should put into it. So of course, if you want to sort of to achieve satisfaction, you do it. And of course, the important thing is, though, sort of to be thorough and patient, because of course it may take a number of sort of attempts to sort of get it right. But hey, it's about the sort of the long-term sort of goals, and not the sort of the short-term sort of needs, as it were. Okay, continuing this section, be consistent, ensure convincing arguments and explanation of ideas. The other thing I would sort of put in here, and I'll probably keep emphasizing this from now on, learn to be economic. That I personally would sort of hold my hands up and say, I have a danger of sort of being overly verbose or trying to sort of explain everything. I think you have to, at some point, sort of recognize that sort of there are word limits, and certainly in sort of conference proceedings and journal articles, and even journal articles, it's quite common to sort of, you've got to get your sort of ideas within 5,000 words. It may seem like a lot, but it isn't. So you've got to write in a style that's pithy, and using as few words as possible to get the sort of the idea across. So and this is something of a skill. The other important thing, of course, is to provide evidence of the sort of the truthness or the veracity of the theories that you're presenting. Although, again, let's not get too carried away by this. It's just some sort of basis for what's being said. I'm not going to get into the whole philosophy of theories, but theories are explanation or explanations of whatever it is that you're proposing. And there are good theories and there are strange theories. So, but without any sort of background or substantiation or evidence, then it's very difficult to make a judgment as to sort of whether they have any worth or otherwise. Clearly, like any sort of piece of work, brainstorm the ideas, get a definite direction, map it out in your head. And the more you plan ahead of this, and this is a previous bullet point, that the more time you spend prior to sort of being involved in sort of writing, the better, because of course it will sort of cut out the sort of the wasted time later on. And I think I've said this already, but write in a precise and accurate way, avoid long convoluted sentences, and presenting it in such a way as people find it difficult to follow. I've used the expression of blogs, and in fact, it was one of the things that when I first started writing them, I still had this tendency to sort of write in paragraphs, and blogs are actually sort of single sentences, single short punchy sentences, because that's the stylistic sort of method to make it conversational. But normally in sort of academic writing, it's not like that. It is supposed to be something which is much more structured into some subtitles and longer paragraphs. So it's one of my big bugbears when I'm marking student work, where I get sort of one sentence paragraphs. That's not good grammar, but again, it depends upon the audience. And so right to sort of the expectations of whoever is in control of that particular publication. Okay, I don't probably need to say this to you. Anybody who's done this will sort of know that word limits, it's strange how, say for instance, so you're going to write 5,000 words. It seems like a little bit of a mountain climb, and indeed, that those of you that are doing doctoral work will know that it's more like to be sort of 50,000 words for a professional doctorate, and up to 80,000 words for a social science PhD. It seems like a mountain to climb, but boy, oh boy, once you start putting it all together, it becomes much more difficult insofar as that, to try and trim it down and keep the sessions in equivalence. And word limits are there to stop people going on forever. Like the old joke about the letter. I had to write a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one. And actually, the truth is contained within the joke. It takes time to hone things down and to get it to that pithy style, which of course says all that needs to be said within the words that the word limit. Okay, so I've made that point already. Write economically. Make sure people reads well. Avoid disconnected sentences. Aim for clear, concise, and grammatically correct English, which of course is, unless of course the publication is written in a different language. But certainly I can only speak from the fact that the vast majority of everything I've done has been in English, and that is the rule, as it were. And certainly when I review papers for a journal article, I mean, often it's a combination of a whole lot of factors, but boy, oh boy, if you get a sort of paper that's poorly written and it's poorly grammatical and it's got typos, it's a kind of telltale sign that people haven't really sort of spent the time on this thing that they should have done. It's a sort of a bit of a giveaway, and it's what we know immediately as an own goal that you've given whoever is carrying out the review process reason to sort of doubt whether this thing should sort of see the light of day. Titles, again, and of course it may be something. It depends, at the process. If the piece has been accepted and it's the end process, well, of course, make it sort of descriptive. But also, sometimes what you're expected to do at the outset is to sort of to provide an idea or propose an idea, and in journalistic terms, is to sort of to give the sort of the notion, or this sort of it's a pitch. That's the word I was looking for. You're pitching an idea, and of course, it's about the title. So sometimes, of course, and depending in journalistic circles, it needs to be something which is really sort of a bit controversial, because of course that's how ideas get taken up. Because journalism is about sort of new ideas or something that's radical, something that's going to sort of grab the headlines. But of course, in journal articles, I've seen sort of hugely long titles, and sometimes they're phenomenally long, because of course they're meant to be overly descriptive in a way, which of course it becomes a complete and utter mouthful. What's important also at this point, also lastly, is that if you wish your article or whatever you publish to be cited, by making it sort of pithy and descriptive in such a way as that it's easy to remember, it might help you then get cited later. And being cited is really, really important, because of course that's another measure of sort of researcher's worth. Okay, and the final part of this section is, if you can, proofreading is a sort of good way to do things, or to get people involved. In such a way as, of course, that they will sort of go through it and they will give you tips. Now, quite clearly, that there's a whole host of sort of moral sort of conundrums that sort of enter into this. But again, certainly in publications, that it's no bad thing to get someone to sort of to have a look over and to spot the sort of the typos and the inconsistencies and the sort of, as we know, the non sequiturs, the things that don't sort of add up. And quite often, some of my supervisors said to me, if you can get somebody that knows nothing about the sort of the work, and they understand what you're writing about, then that's a success. This quotation came from sort of an eminent sociologist at Manchester University. The clever thing is to make the complex things simple, not the other way around. And indeed, I come back to sort of the point I made a while ago about sort of journal articles being a bit incomprehensible. They're written in such a way as to sort of exclude, not include. But okay, and of course, the most important thing, certainly in sort of academic working, is to substantiate as much as possible through the sort of presentation of references. But I also sort of said earlier on, substantiate through the sort of provision of sort of data. You know, how did you arrive at these opinions? What's the basis of the sort of the facts, also whatever sort of arguments that you're presenting? Again, something which I've said on a number of occasions already, but it's worth re-emphasizing. Know your audience, making sure that you understand who it is that you're writing for, and doing it in such a way as that you sort of you basically hit all the sort of the key targets, as it were, and there will be certain ways that these things are sort of understood. And again, the more you do this, the more reading you do, the more writing you do, the better you'll become at recognizing sort of the level and the sort of the way that this thing has got to be structured to sort of hit the right targets. And okay, I practice, you know, well, they say practice makes you perfect. Well, you may not become perfect, you know, nobody ever is, but it certainly sort of makes you a lot better, and that there's no sort of shortcut to that. The more you do it, the better you get. Okay, what is a good piece of research writing consist of? Well, you probably recognize this because, of course, this is the sort of the standard format of any sort of piece of work. An abstract, and if I'll go through all of these in a moment, but basically the summary of the thing, which of course is the sort of that's something you normally do at the end, because of course you can't really do it at the beginning, but in such a way as to sort of to give an overview in as short a number of words as possible. It's certainly something you'll have to do for doctoral work at the end, because of course it's at the beginning, but also abstracts are sort of used as a way of others interrogating the databases to sort of find out what exists. And the shorter you can write, so that the fewer words you can write this thing in, but yet be descriptive and informative, the better, because of course that's how they sort of get picked up and other people sort of become interested in your work. The introduction, which is the sort of an overview of what's in the work, the methods, which I'm sure everyone will be sort of pretty well acquainted with, the data, your analysis and conclusion. And without further ado, let me just get to it. So an abstract, now they vary in length. I'm sticking with sort of, you know, I normally expect them to be about 250 words. It's about sort of locating sort of where your research is, what you've done, how you've done it, what's the sort of the contribution knowledge, and you know, why people should sort of want to sort of read your piece of work. So quite clearly, you know, by having read this, it should be it should be possible to easily understand what's going on and why, and also there should be that sort of sense of sort of uniqueness and relevance in the work. And again, you know, the thing about sort of good abstracts, you know, that they particularly if you have to sort of provide, dare I say, some sort of abstract at the sort of commencement of the work, it will be sort of a method, if you like, of trying to sort of to pitch that work. But more often abstracts are sort of written on completion of the work. And indeed, then of course that's the other thing, of course, is that sort of you hope that others sort of see what it is that you've got to offer, and they sort of they want you to sort of write something different. Because of course the other thing which I'm fully aware of is that PhDs and professional doctors don't get published in their entirety. What does happen is that you're asked to write sort of summaries for particular publications. Secondly, the introduction. Again, you know, you probably know this already, but what I would always say about an introduction, I always regard it, is you've got the contents page, but it should be a sort of, it's a contents which is kind of annotated, you've exemplified it, it basically tells you exactly what all of the subsequent sections are. And unlike a novel where there's a twist at the end, there'll be no twists in a sort of piece of research. Having read the sort of the abstract and the introduction, you should be under no illusions of sort of what is coming next and what will be in the sort of conclusions as a consequence of having carried out the research. So you know, in terms of the sort of the other two bullet points, keep it simple and logical. And indeed, as I've sort of always emphasized, make sure that, you know, because what people tend to do is they write the introduction very early on, and you know, this is a real giveaway. And then of course they don't go back and revisit it, because the work that they've actually end up doing, it doesn't actually tie in with the introduction. I mean, it's rare, I have to say, So make sure that sort of what you say you're going to do is what you actually end up doing. And of course, as anybody who's done doctoral work will know, they tend to sort of shift about. So make sure, of course, it's probably one of the last things that you do, it and the sort of the abstract on completion, certainly the thesis, or indeed any sort of piece of work that is published. Don't overcomplicate and concentrate on the most important aspects of the work. As I said a couple of moments ago, make it or write it in such a way as that anybody, most particularly a non-expert in the area, can easily understand what's going on. The methods section, what's been done and why, because of course methods are important to sort of convince your audience, depending upon the sort of nature of the publication, of why this work has been done in a sort of rigorous way, and it's been done in a sort of way which conforms to sort of the conventional methods of eliciting knowledge that is relevant to sort of the phenomena under study. So quite clearly, nobody would sort of take drugs that had not been sort of laboratory tested. I appreciate this in recent sort of months, because of course, of the sort of the worldwide pandemic, that the sort of the normal process has been shortened, but nonetheless there is good evidence, done very, very quickly, I accept, to sort of to demonstrate why you should do that. So that's laboratory testing, or sort of clinical testing as it's called. But if we're talking about organizational aspects, that sort of what do people do and how did they get to access to sort of the organization in which they've carried out the work, and so on and so forth. So your methods should have that level of persuasiveness that would be expected by the sort of the audience who are reading it. And of course, the other thing is that I'm always conscious or acutely aware that different academics have different positions. So be sort of prepared to sort of have to sort of defend yourself, perhaps in a way which might sort of seem is born of hostility. Not everyone will agree with sort of what you think you're doing on the way that you've done it, and that's the sort of the nature of the sort of the academic community. That there are various strands of opinion as to what has relevance, and particularly in terms of research methods. But again, I don't want to get too much into sort of to research philosophy, because we will be sort of that's for other sessions. Data. Again, I feel like I probably don't need to say too much about that, because what creates research is the sort of the ability to sort of go and elicit sort of data which is pertinent to sort of the phenomena under sort of examination or under study. But of course, the thing is that, and I do appreciate that sort of depending upon the sort of the people involved here today, some of you may be collecting numerical data, which of course lends itself to sort of to tables and charts and whatever. But of course, if you're doing a sort of an organizational sort of piece of work, it may also be that sort of that you have to sort of present interview data, which is a lot more difficult, because you can't put that into tables in exactly the same sort of way. And there's a whole argument about the sort of word limits and sort of how much interview data you should sort of put in. But of course, what's also really good, that the best articles I have, that they are illustrated. Also, they include lots of really good illustrative material, which helps to sort of to get the sort of the points across in a way which summarize it. Pictures do paint 1,000 words and all of that. So sort of and again in bullet point 2 there, the more you can summarize, the better, because it sort of makes it easier for the sort of the person then to sort of to understand the sort of the nature of the work that's been carried out, and why it's important to sort of to better understand what's included. Daily presentation contains results, no discussion. So there is this argument. It's not at this sort of stage for you to sort of to make your opinion. That will be done in the analysis, because of course, like any classic experiment, the data is whatever the data is. Whatever the method of measuring something, you get that's however you set up the experiment in the first place. How you then sort of interpret and analyze those results, that's the real skill, which we'll deal with in the next section, section rather. The most importantly, again, if you're writing for a particular publication and they have particular guidelines in terms of what to do, don't depart from it. Do exactly, and I'll put that in capital letters, the do in capital letters, because if you try and do something different, it just gives them a way of saying, sorry, you've not conformed. And it's a straightforward rejection, which of course means that the work is done for nothing. So comply with instructions, if that's important. The analysis, this is where you sort of get your opportunity to sort of to proffer opinions based upon not personal judgment, although that always comes in because that's the sort of skill of the sort of the academic writer, but it's on the basis of the sort of the data that's been presented and how it sort of stacks up compared to what was expected. Does it comply with the hypothesis? Does the sort of the data that you've been able to elicit give you a good indication of what's going on in terms of the sort of what was expected? What's effective is the data telling us, and what's the import for theory and advancing sort of our knowledge. Provide clarity as to sort of why the results have been produced and the interpretation of significance. Show why they're important and how the knowledge has been advanced, and provide explanations. So again, this is your opportunity to show how what you've done will shift opinion or shift our sum total of knowledge by sort of contributing in whichever way you believe that sort of the research carried out allows you to do. And that of course is the acid test of any good piece of research. And of course, finally, the conclusions. And of course, this is essentially conclusions on any piece of work that starts asking lots of questions. Although I do that, but that's more about journalistic sort of inquiry. But certainly in a sort of a piece of doctoral work that you're writing up, you give an indication of what's important in your work and why your work deserves to be published. So just sum up what you've done and how you've done it and why it's important. Most importantly, I suppose, what you're trying to do is to sort of why people shouldn't miss the opportunity to include your work and certainly to read it. Brief restatement of the objectives, refer it's been carried out, and to the data and findings. And I always believe that sort of make your conclusion concise and punchy. But and of course, in any piece of work, regardless of where it's published, try and top and tail. So you set out to do something in the sort of the beginning, and at the end you restate the sort of that and show why you have end up sort of where you have, or how the sort of the work has sort of shifted because of the sort of the data that's come along in the meantime. Okay. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to sort of not going to agonize too much about this, but there's a number of reasons why research is not published, and of course submission is not considered relevant, needs more work to refine and clarify, failure to comply with the guidelines, which I've just been talking about, and inadequate standard of English. And these are all fairly sort of standard reasons given sort of in any sort of sphere. So all I can say is the better you make your piece of work, regardless of what the publication outlet may be, the more chance it will be of being included. Because of course, quite often, and particularly in the case of sort of learned journals, they are sort of. I read a statistic and it was amazing. It was something like. I think it's something like 10 million articles. I have to go and check that, but we're talking sort of a phenomenal number of articles published each year, and indeed, if you look at the statistics, that China, has from what's I suppose a bit of a standing start sort of 25 years ago, because of course they are now publishing in the international sort of sphere. That there's a phenomenal demand from potential authors to be included. The point that I'm making, lest it sort of not be obvious, is that sort of journal editors are looking for reasons not to include. They couldn't possibly include everything that's submitted to them, so that they only include the sort of those articles which comply with sort of or meet their sort of expectations of the outlet. Therefore, of course, by not doing it well in the first instance, you give them a reason to certainly to reject. Quite often you have to resubmit, but sometimes it's no, we're just not interested, and that's the end of that particular process. So the more work you do at the beginning, the better. Right, I mean, like any sort of, if you're applying for a job, you want to make sure it gives a sort of good sort of an overview. It sells your work, because quite often that's, I mean, in the old days it would have been a letter, but of course it's now an email, and that's often sort of the first inquiry. Will you sort of be interested in publishing work? Why should they sort of include this? Well, you've got to sell yourself. You've got to tell them why you sort of went for sort of this particular sort of outlet. Summarize what's in it in a sort of way which of course is as I've said, emphasized a couple of moments ago, in a pithy, and as I use the expression, economic way, but it says all the right things, and it includes the sort of the novelty value and the sort of the importance. What you're trying to do is to sort of give them sort of a reason. They've got to think, oh, gosh, this is so good, I can't afford to miss it. So hit all the buttons, because of course you want your sort of work to be published, and you want them to think that they can't afford to miss you. You want them begging you, not you begging them, as it were. But hey, that's often the way. So spending a bit of time on that covering email is important. Hey, I came across this. I don't know what the publication is, but it's the sort of the idea that this is about sort of refereeing of sort of a journal article for a scientific journal. It is the idea that it's a kind of they're going through a sort of form of sort of torture and punishment, and it can feel like that, and indeed it can take many months, if not years, of sort of constant editing and sort of coming back and forth before you get to the end. And certainly the sort of the highest ranked journals, it can often take a couple of years before from the point of original submission to the point of actually getting something published. But of course, the sort of the highest rated journals, they pride themselves very much on sort of the fact that they are very discerning in what they eventually publish. Right, okay, I'm not going to sort of go through this. This actually comes from a sort of presentation by Emerald. There's a whole lot of reasons. Emerald's really good, actually. I think that it works at a level which makes it sort of, it's very inclusive, and they want people to sort of to publish. And actually, you don't necessarily have to be working in academia to publish in it. So as you can see there, in terms of businesses, and there's a whole host of sort of reasons why sort of people want to sort of to get into a sort of journal. And of course, some journals, it is about sort of propagating knowledge. Others, it's about sort of making money. So, recognize the sort of the differences. But as I say, that there are good reasons why people want to publish. And of course, if you sort of comply with those reasons, or you sort of you adhere to sort of the logic and wisdom of those, then of course that will serve you well. So again, constantly know your audience. But as I say, it's how our sort of any advanced society, it's one of the great difficulties we have, that they talk certainly in this country about the Dark Ages. In medieval times, we had a lot to go on in terms of sort of the Romans and beyond, but then all of a sudden that nobody wrote anything down. It was the invention of the printing press has allowed us to sort of to know a lot more about sort of those civilizations. And of course, it'll be interesting because, of course, with the internet, that our problem is that there's never a shortage of knowledge. It's the sort of we're sort of drowning in it at times. It feels it's very difficult to keep up. But the more that we can put into sort of the public realm, the better. So there are many good reasons to publish. But as I said right at the outset, publishing your doctoral work is a really good way, if you like, of drawing attention to your work. Right, next one, selecting the right journal. Look, it's really difficult. Which journal would most academics want to be in? The top rated journals, quite clearly. It's a bit like if you want to play football, everyone wants to play football for the best teams in the world, but only a sort of select few can do that. So therefore, of course, there is a sort of hierarchy of journals. I mean, quite clearly, depending upon the sort of the discipline in which you're carrying out your work, that will determine the sort of the range of journals. But in my academic career, the number of journals, I wouldn't like to sort of give you a sort of an instance, but I was talking about sort of the number of journal articles being published each year being it's certainly into the millions. But there are many thousands of journals in every sphere and discipline. And dare I say, within the sort of each of those disciplines, or within each of, for something like, for instance, the area which I'm most familiar with, business and management, there is a whole hierarchy of the sort of the top ranked journals down to sort of journals which are, they're not quite so highly ranked, but they all serve their own particular purposes. You have to choose the one that you think is most importantly, that you think you've got the best shot of getting into. And quite clearly, I've never had an article. I don't suppose I will do in something like the Harvard Business Review, but if you haven't come across it, it's seen as it's strangely, it's not a journal article as such, but it's still sort of highly influential. But there are many other sort of journals where, of course, only the sort of top-rated academics who spend a tremendous amount of time and effort get into. So okay, so there's a whole set of sort of things that you can look at, and beyond that, I can't give you sort of the advice about how to do it. You've got to sort of to work with your own understanding, and of course your supervisory team, if this is what you wish to do, to sort of to get into sort of the journal that you can. But wherever you can get published, it's a good thing, and it's all part of a developmental process. Okay, and this is again, I'm not going to over elaborate on this. It's the sort of the process that sort of goes through. Research is the sort of if I just use the sort of cursors, the sort of the feedback loop, and it's just the beginning goes the editor, the publishing, managing editor, production, and of course users, and of course, as I indicated right at the outset, it's the sort of the catalyst for others to sort of then think, oh right, okay, well that's been done, I can develop that in a different direction. And of course, that's where the sort of the uniqueness comes in. So it becomes a sort of cyclical, and Derek, is it symbiotic? Well, it's a collective process that your work, by being published and getting into sort of the public arena, and certainly into sort of the arena of the community of researchers, it helps others then to sort of to know how they can sort of develop that work in different ways. Remembering the peer review is a process. When it's done, it's a way of enhancing and improving the sort of work. So as I say, almost all published work, almost all PhDs, almost all doctoral work does require to be revised in some way. So rarely, I've come across it on only, I think on memory, one occasion, where sort of a PhD went through without any amendments. It has to, to do that, you have to be sort of staggeringly good. So it's a normal sort of process, whether it's minor or major mods, go back and improve it on the basis of that sort of that peer review, that expert knowledge and advice. It will make this work better. And if you ask people who've been through it, they will tell you that the sort of the piece of work was better at the end than it was at the sort of the beginning, because that's the sort of the nature of what's being accomplished. Finally, concentrate on the sort of the goal. Recognize that sort of you're contributing to a field, and it's part of your development as an expert. It is really important. What does this tell us? Well, again, I use this at the outset. Publish or perish. It's utterly relevant to all research. Though the thesis is critical, it's the font from which you can sort of generate output. So think about it like that. It's the sort of the seed bed of lots of things that will come out of it, hopefully. And of course, the great pieces of sort of research do sort of spawn off lots of other sort of publication. Indeed, academic careers have been built on a good piece of doctoral work. Think about the ways in which publication can be built into your research. I did actually sort of talk about it. So that this metaphor of the sort of the journey, it may seem like a distraction, but if you do it in the right way, it can be a sort of a really helpful distraction. It can help you to clarify your thoughts, perhaps hone off the sort of things which are not so sort of relevant. And most importantly, when you do something and it works well and you are published, it gives confidence to sort of go on to sort of the next stages. And of course, ultimately, in terms of any sort of doctoral work, it's about the sort of the really big piece of work, which of course is getting to the top of the mountain. As I would always say, one of the joys of being a sort of doctoral student is that you do work with at least one supervisor, and normally there's a supervisory team. They will guide you, and it may be, and certainly I've seen this happen, I can speak with some personal experience, it can be a sort of really great experience to sort of co-author with your supervisor and indeed other people within the sort of the department. There was a number of us all working collaboratively, and it lasted for a couple of years while we were all doing our PhDs, and it was a really fruitful time. So that can be a great way to sort of to get going, and then to, as I say, the most successful sort of publishers, they do work collaboratively. Rarely do you get these days academic writers working on their own, because it can be a lonely existence. And of course, that's essentially what the sort of last bullet point says. It's being part of a community is good, and it develops your reputation, and it's what turns us into the sort of the good academics that we all hope to be. Okay, and this is the sort of the advertisement. There is a sort of a developed course on this, writing and structure your thesis, which of course is available from Doctoratehub. So little bit of a sales act here, so which I'm sure if you've been onto Doctoratehub, you will see that sort of comes with sort of in various formats. And of course, if you want to do this, then of course you should seek advice and guidance and get in contact with others from Doctoratehub. Okay, I think on that sort of note, I'll actually sort of call a halt. You've heard enough of my voice, and I will sort of then stop sharing. Okay, so I can see everyone. I'm just going to look into the chat. So it's, oh gosh, right. Okay, I'm just, I'm just trying. This is from Andrea Foster. After identifying potential journals for publication, should you submit your article to one journal or to sort of several journals? Well, I mean, the reality is that it's a game. If I can answer that now, of course, it's highly unlikely, but you know, the difficulty is you can't publish the same thing in different journals. That there will be a copyright. So therefore, if for argument's sake you submitted to 3 journals and they're all accepted, you're in a bit of a bind. So what I would sort of say is that try in the one that you most want to get into, and maybe it's the sort of the highest ranked journal, and then if you get accepted, brilliant. If you don't, work your way down. But I also accept that there is this thing about sort of, if you sort of shoot off in enough direction, if you throw enough I don't know, whatever the expression might be, arrows, then something's bound to hit the target. But you know, be careful of that, because of course that the journals that they but the reality is, as I fully accept, that you can adapt, and it's quite often many academics, you know, it's similar ideas but written in a different format, and you know that's perfectly fine also. So if you were in the very lucky position where you were accepted in by different journals for the same article, then you might have to then do a bit of sort of retrospective work to sort of to make sure it's sufficiently different. Okay, I'm just looking at that. Okay, well, that's the only question. Are there any other further questions? And if people don't want to sort of type, which is one way of doing this, then feel free to sort of unmute yourself and sort of say something. So I'm going to ask Jack, is there anything that you'd like to say, Jack?
What I might actually do is turn off the recording that allow people may want to ask questions without being recorded.
No problem.
So I'll do that to start with.